Have you been to Jesus for the cleansing power? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His grace this hour? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood, in the soul-cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you walking daily by the Savior's side? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Do you rest each moment in the crucified? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood, in the soul-cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Lay aside the garments that are stained with sin and be washed in the blood of the Lamb. There's a fountain flowing for the soul unclean. Oh, be washed in the blood of the Lamb. Are you washed in the blood, in the soul-cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? You give life, you are love. You bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you, only you. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you, only you.
Amen. I appreciate DJ again singing for us. Appreciate you guys being here. Look in Acts chapter 12, and we'll continue with our story. We left off last week, chapter 10, 11. Again, some of my favorite parts of Acts. Peter goes to Cornelius' house and he leads him to the Lord. And to me, again, it's interesting that there was no requirement for baptism before they got the Holy Spirit and they got saved. They got saved, then that stuff happened. I think that's why it's in there, really, and to show us that how God was appealing to the Gentile believer. Now we come to chapter 12. Chapter 12, well, let me say this. At the end of chapter 11, there's a famine in Jerusalem. And so the people the Christians, we can call them Christians now, the Christians in Jerusalem went to Antioch and helped with teaching and spiritual stuff. And now the saints in Antioch, who are brand new Christians, they come down to Jerusalem and help them with the food. So there's two things going on in Jerusalem. One is the famine. They're being persecuted with a famine. The second thing that's happening is they're suffering because the Jewish and the Roman authorities are persecuting them. So in Jerusalem, there's a lot of stuff going on. On the one hand, they have this famine that's happening, and the Antiochians come and help them with that. And on the other hand, they're being persecuted physically and politically. And so all that sets this up. Now, Luke is going to record chapter 12 for us, and it's really one story with a really climactic ending, but he's going to record this for us in order to illustrate God's supernatural protection of his own. That's why it's in here, to show that even though the forces of evil may be against you, keep doing the right thing and God will protect you. So that's the reason chapter 12 is stuck in here. And there's another reason. It's going to show that the Jewish people keep rejecting the Messiah. And so Luke puts this in Acts in order to show us those two things. So it's going to start in verse 1. And the first section actually goes down to verse 19, and then it's going to end in verse 25 with a really kind of dramatic kind of conclusion of this. But let's take the first two verses first. About that time, Herod the king laid hands on some who belonged to the church in order to mistreat them. And he had James, a brother of John, put to death with a sword. So here's the way this sets up. Verse 1, about that time, it's going back probably to the time of the famine where Barnabas and Saul mentioned that in chapter 11, verse 30. So, in other words, all this taking place about the same time. Herod, why is Herod mad? Herod Agrippa, the king, is a Jew. And he's putting these Jewish people to death. Why is he doing that? Especially the Apostle James. Because Herod is a non-believer. He's not a Christian Jew, not a Messianic Jew. And so what's happening is all these traditional Jewish people are upset that some of their Jewish friends are converting to Christianity. And so they're putting all this pressure on Herod. And so Herod's feeling all this political pressure. So what he decides to do is, let me make some friends out of these Jews, so I'll kill some of these Christians, some of these converted Jews. And so he starts doing that. And James is the first apostle to die. And interestingly, if you trace the 12 apostles outside of Judas, who kills himself, the only one that doesn't die like this is John. John dies of old age. The rest of them are martyred. They're not all martyred by Herod, but James just happens to be the first. And so when James the apostle gets martyred, the word starts to spread that, hey, Herod he's after the apostle. And if he can go after the apostle, he'll go after anybody. And so it's going to kind of leave us with a question, because something's going to happen to Peter that doesn't happen to James, and you kind of left wondering why. It's just the sovereignty of God. Nobody knows. But in those first two verses, Agrippa is the king, and Agrippa, the Christian Jewish people become extremely offensive to the other Jews, and they put all this pressure on him, and so he's going to please some of his subjects by mistreating the others. That's really what's happening. So look at verse 3. When he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. Now it was during the days of unleavened bread. All right, so that's going to tell you when it happened. Unleavened bread is a 7-day celebration that started on the day after Passover every spring. So what would be our Easter? So the day after Easter, the day after Passover in the New Testament, started the Feast of Unleavened Bread, 7-day celebration. It's one of 3 feasts that all the Jewish people their Jewish men were required to come to Jerusalem. There's 3 of them, because it's not like Not like you can jump in the car and drive 20 minutes. It's pretty good hike to get to Jerusalem. And so in the law, it required Jewish men, unless there was an extreme reason that they couldn't, it required them to go to Jerusalem to celebrate. So why has he put this in here? Because there's a lot of Jewish people in the city. And so when he arrests Peter, it's going to really cause some stirrings, because everybody looks at Peter and says, that's the leader of the apostles. That's the guy. That's God's number one man. That's what they're saying. And so with all these Jews that come from all over Israel to Jerusalem, this is going to be a scene, and it's going to make Herod a name. And Herod thinks, I'm really going to impress a lot of people, a lot of Jews, when I arrest this guy. Because of all the apostles, Peter's probably one that offended the most traditional Jews, because Peter just said what he wanted to say. And so Luke tells us that after all this took place with the famine in Antioch and all this, that Herod got this wild idea to start persecuting Christian Jews, Messianic Jews, because the other Jews didn't like it. So he had this crazy deal that it just happened to be Passover and unleavened bread. So let me just take out Peter. Let me go get him. So verse 3, he arrests Peter. Look at verse 4. When he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him out before the people. So there's a lot in that verse. Usually there's just one squad or 2 people. Usually what they did when they got a prisoner, because y'all remember what happened in the earlier part of Acts, Peter got out. He's already been in jail one time, and he got supernaturally delivered. And so Herod steps it up a notch. Because honest to goodness, the next day he's going to execute Peter. That's what's going to happen. He just didn't put him in prison for no reason. Put him in prison, next day he's going to kill him. And so he was bound and determined, I'm not letting Peter out this time. So we got 4 squads. Each squad contains 4 soldiers. That's 16 soldiers. And they went on shifts. Each squad had a shift. So there's 4 soldiers with Peter at all times. When I was in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Italy, years ago, they've got a box, and the church claims that, I don't know how they can claim this is true, but they have a box. And I started to bring a picture, but I couldn't find them. But there's a looks like a fish tank, and there's a set of old chains in there. And the Catholic Church claims that those chains are the chains that Peter had in Acts chapter 12. That they're the original chains from Acts. I don't know if they can prove that or what, but that's what they say. But anyhow, watch what's happened. So they arrest Peter a second time. And Herod says, I'm not letting him out. I'm not going to let him go, because last time he got out. And the last time, if you remember, Peter was preaching. They said, quit preaching. And they threw him in jail. He got out. The angel let him out. And the very next day he went to the temple and started preaching again. And Gamaliel and some of the leaders of Israel said, let's don't make a big deal out of this. It'll fizzle out on its own. Well, it's not fizzling out, And so now they've arrested him again. So usually what they do is assign a prisoner with 2 guards. One soldier will put his right hand to the prisoner's left hand, and then the other guard will stand at the door. That's the way they normally done it. So you got 2 guards per prisoner, 1 chained to the prisoner, 1 at the door. On his hand, he said, no, I want 4 guys in there. And so in Peter's case, he's chained to a guard on both hands. And then he's got 2 guards at the door, because Herod is sending a signal, you can't let this guy out. He's already escaped once, you're not going to let him escape again. And so that's what verse 4 is telling you, that he's in jail. He gets 4 squads, 16 soldiers rotating in shifts, and they're gonna make sure that he can't get out of that cell. That's the point. Now look at verse 5. So Peter was kept in the prison, but prayer for him was being made fervently by the church to God. So Peter's in jail. He's got 4 soldiers guarding him, and they have the church now, the new church, the Christians, that are praying for him. and I don't want to get off into the weeds in this, but there's a place on the northwest wall of the Temple Mount called the Antonia Fortress. Used to, they would say that is where Jesus was interrogated by Pilate, and that starts the Via Dolorosa, the trip to the cross. More modern research shows that probably not the case, that they would have probably used Herod's palace for the praetorium for the questioning of Jesus. But in this case, Peter went to the Antonia Fortress, and that's where they had him prisoner. So it's it's in ruins now, but so it's a massive semi-castle on the northwest wall of the Temple Mount, and it had a massive prison complex. So they took Peter there, and they chained him 2 guards, put 2 at the door. So and I'll tell you, they're serious about this. The next day, they're going to kill him. But look what happens, because there's 2 competing things happening. All right. On the one hand, there's a prison, and so there's a prison that is effectively keeping Peter there for his execution. But on the other hand, there's prayer. So we got prayer versus prison. And honestly, a prayer, or a prison, I should say, is no match for a prayer. And so God's people are praying, and these are relatively new Christians. You know, God has not done a lot in their life to prove himself to them. They don't have a whole long track record of being Christian. They're relatively new. And so they're praying, and Peter's in prison. Look at verse 6. On the very night when Herod was about to bring him forward, in other words, to bring him out and be judged, to be executed, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and guards in front of the door were watching over the prison. And behold, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, and a light shone in the cell. So Peter's in the jail, got 2 soldiers, got the chains, got the guards. The church is praying. The angel did the delivering, but the prayer brought the angel. Does that make sense? So they're praying, God, please help our friend Peter. You know, please help our pastor friend. And an angel shows up, and this angel comes into the prison with Peter. Now, Peter is the only word I can use is groggy. You know, he's asleep in the middle of the night. Which, by the way, and here's the question that I always have. James was just as devout apostle as Peter, and James got killed with a sword, and Peter's going to be delivered. Why does God choose to do that? Why does God choose to take some really devout Christians in a church and leave some? You know, people debate that all the time, but we don't know. I mean, it's just the sovereignty of God. But look at Peter, and let me just pose a question, because I think about these things. If you were in jail, and you knew, I mean, by all intents and purposes, you know that the way the trial went, the way the language is going, tomorrow's your last day. I mean, they're going to execute you. What do you think you would be doing? What do you think you'd be doing in a prison cell overnight, knowing tomorrow's your last day? If you're a Christian, probably praying. I would think praying. What's Peter doing? Sleeping. Do you remember up on the Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus told Peter, James, John, stay here and pray, and what did they do? Go to sleep. Let me tell you something. Peter did not have an insomnia problem. This dude slept all the time when he should have been praying. And so he's in the prison, and he's asleep. Here's a reason I think that he's asleep. If you remember, back in John chapter 21, verse 18, let me read this verse, because I think evidently Peter remembers this. This is John chapter 21, verse 18. This is Jesus. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were younger, you used to gird yourself and walk wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will gird you. He's talking to Peter. And so Jesus said, when you were young, somebody dressed you. When you're old, you're going to need help. Or you dress yourself, and when you're old, you're going to need help. So Jesus has already told Peter he's going to live to an old age. And so I think Peter is probably thinking, okay, I don't know what God's going to do, but I'm comfortable. And so Peter goes to sleep. And look at verse 7. Watch the it's almost like a parent-child, if you've ever had to wake up a child for school. And behold, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, and a light shone in the cell, and he struck Peter's side and woke him up, saying, "Get up quickly." And his chains fell off his hands. Those are the chains that are in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Italy, that they say are that they have. You know, again, I don't know. It's just nice to look at. Verse 8, and the angel said to him, what? Let me paraphrase this. Get dressed, put on your shoes. And Peter did so. And he said to him, put your coat on and follow me. That's very, it's very like parental. You know, this angel pops in there. Peter's asleep. The angel wakes him up and says, you know, get dressed, put shoes on. Peter groggily does it. I don't think Peter realizes yet what's happening. You know, I think he thinks it's a dream or a vision or something. And this angel wakes him up, tells him to get dressed. Peter gets up, and the angel said, don't forget your coat, you know. Peter grabs his coat, puts it on, and the angel leads him outside. It's not until he gets outside that Peter starts to realize exactly what happened. So look at verse 8. Actually, verse 8 and 9. I'm sorry, verse 10. When they had passed the first and second guard, so the guards didn't even know. They came to the iron gate that leads into the city, which opened for them by itself. And they went out and went all along one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. So once outside the prison and left alone by the angel, Peter starts to kind of come to himself and realize what's happening. In other words, I think he realized, hey, I'm actually free. It's not a dream. It's not a vision. I'm actually outside the prison. Now, I think Luke did this to tell us the story, but I also think it parallels God leading the children of Israel out of Egypt in the Exodus. You know, let them out of prison, as it were. You know, out of bondage. God, because God has a plan, and God's plan is that the church, especially this early church, are going to go and witness to Jews and Gentiles, especially Gentiles. That's the plan. Well, Peter's one of the leaders of it. They put him in jail and they're going to kill him, but God lets him out. Here's the lesson for us, and I want you to hear me when I say this. God's enemies can never thwart his plan. When God has a plan, nothing's going to stop that plan from coming to fruition. It's going to happen. There's no way that God's plan can be interrupted, especially how, by something that we do. So in verses 10 and 11, Peter goes out. The angel leads him out. The angel disappears. Peter realizes what happened. Now, here's where it gets interesting and funny to me. Look at verse 12. When he realized this, that he's free, he went to the house of Mary. All right? So he's going to go to a house where he knows that Christians are in there praying, even though it's the middle of the night. He has faith in this church. And so he goes to Mary's house. This is Mary, the mother of John. Look at the way it describes this. And I'll tell you why there's two names in here. He went to the house of Mary, the mother of John. That's his Jewish name, who was also called Mark. That's his Greek name. So John Mark's in there because the Jews call him John, the Gentiles call him Mark. And it's at his house. That's one of the houses that they retained. You know, some of them got sold off to help the poor and all that, but they helped this. They saved this house. And so at Mary's house, Christians are in there praying, and they are praying for Peter. They're praying for release. Please, God, if Israel will let our friend out, you know, please do something supernatural and get him out. Look at verse 13. When he knocked at the door of the gate, a servant girl named Rhoda, literally that is rosebud. That's what it means in Greek. So he goes to the door of the gate, and a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer, and then some other events are going to transpire. Why does it say the door of the gate? Let me tell you, in the Old Testament, gate means city hall. In the New Testament, it means a gate. Here's the way the houses were, which incidentally, I think when Jesus said, I'm going to heaven to build, many mansions, and there's a room for you and all that stuff. This is what he's talking about. If you go somewhere like when we went to Capernaum, if you go to Capernaum now, the houses are built in what we call insular homes. It's not like a subdivision you go to now. It's not like a subdivision you drive down the street and there's a house here and a house here and a house here. It's almost like many houses built like apartments, and they are all interconnected. So it's like they're apartments, but they're houses, because they have four walls and they're isolated, and there's a little gap in between. But they're called insular homes. They have a common courtyard out in the front. So it's like a communal courtyard out there. Everybody uses the same courtyard, and everybody comes in the same gate. You go in the gate, then you go to your specific dwelling place, which is what the book of John says. And so in this chapter 12, it's the outer gate that Peter comes up to. So he comes up, there's a gate around the houses, and there's several houses in there. They are all in one particular house in there. And Peter walks up and knocks on the gate. Rhoda comes out of the house and comes out to the gate, through the courtyard and out to the gate. And again, incidentally, I think that's what our mansions are going to be like in heaven. Because it actually doesn't say mansion, it says dwelling places. I think we're going to be living in like insular homes where we're going to have our own place, and it's going to have communal stuff. Because heaven is not just floating on a cloud, and playing a harp and all that stuff. It's actually living. We'll be living there. And so, and I think this is a pretty good example of what Jesus was talking about. And so Peter goes to the outside gate, and he knocks on the gate, and Rhoda comes, and she look. Now, what are they doing in the house? Praying for Peter to come. Who comes to the gate? Peter. Look what happens in verse 14. When she recognized Peter's voice, because of her joy, she didn't open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter was standing in front of the gate. So here, they've been praying for this guy all night long. The angel comes down, lets him out of prison. Peter walks over there to the house, knocks on the gate. She hears his voice. She don't really see him. She hears his voice. She says, well, that's Peter. And then instead of opening the gate and saying, oh, welcome, and hugging him and all that stuff, she just leaves the gate closed. She runs back in and says, hey, you ain't going to believe it, but Peter's out there. Now, this is a church. This is a brand new group of Christians. They don't have a track record with watching God do this kind of stuff. It's new to them. They don't know if prayer works. They don't know what God can do. They're not sure. All they know is that God saved them, and they love Him for it. And so they're trying. And so Rhoda comes back in the house. Look at verse 14. Or verse 15, I should say. They said to her, you out of your mind. It's not him. He'd be dead by now, man. It ain't him. But she kept insisting that it was so. And they kept saying, it's just his angel. And Harrison killed him. There's no way. I mean, we love God. We trust God. But we've never seen God do something like this. We're new to this thing. We're learning how it goes. We don't know. And so Rhoda comes and says, hey, we've been praying for Peter. And they said, yeah, we've been praying for Peter. Well, he's at the gate, And instead of somebody saying, well, you goofy, why don't you let him in, they say, it's not him. You lost your mind. It's just an angel. He's already dead. It's just an angel showed up. That's how, and I've heard preachers preach and say, oh, man, they just don't have any faith. I don't think that's it at all. I think they just don't know what God can do. I just don't think they have a history with him like Peter does, and like some of the Old Testament people. They've heard stories, but they've never experienced any of this stuff. And so I don't think we can slide them for it. I think we can just understand that we might have been in the same boat, because it's hard to see God work miracles like that unless we've experienced some, unless we've seen it take place. And so look at verse 19 or verse 16. But Peter continued knocking. I just think that's funny. You know, he just escaped prison where they're going to execute him. And he goes to the Christian's house and knocks on the door. They come to the door, and she said, well, I think that's Peter, but I'm not sure. He runs back in and tells me, so you're crazy, that's a ghost. And Peter's still out there. He's just knocking. I just think that's funny. You know, I don't know if y'all think it's funny, but I think it's funny. And when they opened the door, they saw him and were amazed. But motioning to them with his hand to be silent, he described to them how the Lord had led them out of the prison. And he said, report these things to James. I think this is his half-brother, James, because the other James has been martyred by Herod. And so he said, report these things to James and the brethren, the other apostles and disciples. Then he left and went to another place. And here's what's interesting about this. Because in Acts chapter 5, he gets out of jail and he goes right back to the temple to preach. In this particular case, he gets out of jail. He goes to the Christians. He says, tell James and my brother and the rest of the believers that I'm alive. And then he leaves Jerusalem. And nobody knows where he went. It didn't tell us where he's at or where he's going. We know he went to various churches. He went to Rome. He went to Corinth about this time, but it doesn't really say. It's just that there is a lot of tension going on right now. And so God has something else for Peter, and the rest of the Christians there are going to pick up the slack. Now look at verse 18. Now, let me find it. Yeah, verse 18. Now when day came, and watch the wording, there was no small disturbance among the soldiers as to what could have become of Peter. I would say so. No small disturbance means it's pretty big disturbance, because the last they saw him, he's got a Roman soldier chained to each arm and 2 soldiers at the door and probably some outside. As the last they saw him. And then they wake up in the morning and he's not in there. And so it causes quite a ruckus in Jerusalem. Because when they walk in, his cell's empty. It's like there's no way. I mean, we doubled the guard. We took extra precaution. There's no way he's out. But he's out. So watch Herod's line of reasoning in verse 19. When Herod had searched for him and had not found him, he examined the guards. Because the only thing that Herod can figure out is the guards either cooperated with his escape or they're negligent. And in Roman law, for Roman guards, if you let a prisoner escape, then you get the same punishment that they were going to get. So look what Herod does. He ordered that they should be led away to execution, which tells you that the next day Peter was going to be executed. And so Peter's going to be executed. He escapes. Herod questions the guards and says, okay, one of 2 things happen. Either you guys are incompetent or you are in on it. And so take them away and take care of them. That's what happened. Now look at look at the last part of verse 19, and I want to just show you a grammatical thing that's important, means something. Then he went down from Judea to Caesarea and was spending time there. All right. So Herod left Judea and went. It says he went down went down from Judea to Caesarea. All right, I don't know if you're familiar with the geography of Israel in this time. Judea is in the Old Testament. Judea was the northern kingdom, and Israel was the southern kingdom. By this time, it was a united Israel. It's not divided anymore. But Judea is the term that they loosely describe for around Jerusalem. And so if you look at a map of Israel, it's Judea in the middle, where Jerusalem is. It's the desert area in the south where the Dead Sea and Qumran and all that is. And then it's Galilee in the north where the Sea of Galilee, Capernaum, all that is. So it's Galilee, Judea, and then Samaria, and then down to the bottom, the desert region. Caesarea's at the top. It's actually called Caesarea Maritima because it's a coastal city. It's right on the Mediterranean coast. So look at the way it describes this. He's in Judea in the middle. And it says he goes down to Caesarea. Well, that's up, but not to them. Jewish people, first century people, never used up and down to describe north or south. That's not the way they described it. They used up and down to describe geographical elevations, number one. And Judea in the middle is higher elevation than Caesarea at the top. So they would have said you go down in elevations. You go down. And so people read the Bible, they get confused. They're like, okay, I'm not sure where these places are at because they don't use the terms that we use. Also, in Scripture, you never ever, even if you go to Israel now, you never, ever, ever, ever say go down to Jerusalem, no matter where you're at. It's always up to Jerusalem. It's a spiritual thing. Not only is it an elevated thing where the geography is more elevated, it's spiritual. That's where the temple is, where the Temple Mount is. That's where the old city is. And so no matter where you're at in Israel, north, south, east, or west, it's always we're going up to Jerusalem. And when you talk to people, especially in Israel, especially around Jerusalem, and they say that, it gets confusing until it clicks with you what they're doing. Because no matter, like if you're, like when we were in Galilee, and we were going to get on the bus and head down and say, okay, it's time to head up to Jerusalem. And you look at a mountain and you say, well, actually that's down. And they said, no, it's up, because you're going up in elevation, and it's the spiritual pinnacle of Jerusalem. So when it says that, that's what it means. He's leaving Judea, and he's going down to Caesarea, but he's actually going north. All right, so he's going up to the coast. Now look at verse 20. Now he was very angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and with one accord they came to him, and having won over Blastus, the king's chamberlain, which is a very, very close advisor, they were asking for peace because their country was fed by the king's country. So he's mad at the people of Tyre and Sidon because they're on the Mediterranean coast. They're up on the top, but they depended on Galilee, and for some reason he didn't like that. And so Herod tries to get Peter killed, and it doesn't work. He takes the guards out, has them executed, and then he thinks, okay, I need to change the scenery. So he heads up to Caesarea Maritima, in which he has a big palace. It's a big swimming pool in this palace, and it was a fantastic place. So he's going to go up there. Look at verse 21. On an appointed day, Herod, having put on his royal apparel, took his seat on the rostrum and began delivering an address to them. Now, we have extra biblical evidence that's not in here that adds to this story. Josephus is a first century writer, a Jewish historian from the first century that corroborates a lot of these stories. It's not gospel, it's not Bible, it's just eyewitness accounts of this stuff. Josephus gives us, Luke concentrates more on the medical because he's a doctor. Josephus concentrates more on the ceremonial or actually what goes on. And so when Josephus writes about this exact same incident, Josephus said, because look the way Luke describes it, he put on his royal apparel and he took his seat on the rostrum. Josephus said that he went to the outdoor theater in Caesarea, which makes sense. That's where they would have went. In which, by the way, did you know that do you know the difference between a theater and an amphitheater? An amphitheater is a circle. A theater is just half. And he went to this outdoor theater in Caesarea. That's what Josephus said, which is a very credible source. So Josephus said he goes to this outdoor theater, and he stood before the officials from Tyre and Sidon because they had this strained relationship. and it's a festival day. And Josephus said, where Luke says he put on his royal apparel, Josephus said it was a silver robe. And when the robe hit that, or when the sun hit that robe just right, it sparkled and the sun shone off it real brilliantly and gave this really shiny appearance. So look what Luke says. The people crying out in verse 22, the voice of a God and not a man. And why would they say that? Because Josephus said he put on this silver robe, and when the sun hit, it started gleaming and glittering and all this stuff. And the people are trying to get back in his good graces. And so when they saw this sparkling robe and all this stuff, they started calling out words of praise, calling him a god, because he's mad at them, because they're not doing what they were supposed to do as far as their provisions. And so that's where he's at. Now, look at verse 23. Because what's going on? They're calling him a god. Verse 23, and immediately an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and died. Now, there's a lot of there's a lot of debate on what this means. There are some people, and I'm going to give you my opinion on it. There are some people that think he suffered from appendicitis that turned into peritonitis, and eventually he had some kind of thing going on with roundworms or something. There are some people that say that he had a cyst that burst that was caused by a tapeworm. Honest to goodness, I don't know and I don't care. And I don't think Luke really gives us a lot of detail, because here's what's important. Not the cause, but the reason. What's the reason? His pride. That's why this happened. It didn't matter if he had appendicitis or a tapeworm. It didn't matter what he had. The point is, he supernaturally died because of his pride. Because he tried to kill Peter. Peter escaped. He killed the guards. He ran to Caesarea. And he's like, what am I going to do? I'm mad at these people. He put on this robe. They said, oh, you're a god. And he started liking that. And God said, I'm not going to have it. And so God struck him down with some kind of illness, with whatever it could have been. Like I say, if you read 15 commentaries, you have 15 different ideas on what his ailment was. It's just like with Paul when he said, I have a thorn in the flesh. Who cares? I mean, it's fun to talk about, but in the grand scheme of things, who cares what it was? The main thing is God told him he would supply his need. And so look at what happened in verse 24 after all this. But the word of the Lord continued to grow and be multiplied. God's plan will not be thwarted. But no matter what people do, it's not going to stop. And when we're talking about the word of the Lord, obviously we're talking about the gospel. The gospel continued to grow because of God's supernatural provision. God spared Peter. God took out Herod. God blessed the church. And so now what you've got is the church in Jewish territory with all these Gentiles. The church begins to grow. And then when we get to chapter 13, it's the first missionary journey. And I told you last week, where do they all start from? Antioch. So here's what I think. When Peter left, I think he probably went to Antioch myself, because the gang is going to get together at Antioch, and they're going to send out the first missionary team to start establishing these churches. From this point on, we're going to start talking about Corinth and Galatia and Ephesus and all these churches. And every time he starts a church, there's an epistle that correlates with it. And so what we need to do is, when we talk about that church, kind of give a summary of what that epistle was about. Because when he started the church had issues. And when they had issues, he wrote those epistles to help them with their issues. And it correlates with a specific church. So any questions about chapter 12? The church continues to grow. I think that's the takeaway. Anybody? All right. If we don't have any questions, we have any prayer requests that we need to add?